Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tome of Uselessness. I'm Dan, and this is a solo episode, and today's topic is going to be Silence of the Lambs, both a book and the movie. If you haven't seen Silence of the Lambs or read the book, I would recommend coming back to this episode after at least watching the movie, because everything I'm going to go through will spoil everything about the movie and the book in some areas. So I would highly recommend, and I recommend this for a lot of things, reading or watching the movie first, then reading the book afterwards. The reason I recommend that for many things is, of course, the book always is a lot deeper and more in depth, and you get more character motivation and everything like that. So things either become more crystal clear or are clarified, and you can understand the characters a lot better. And with this set, with the movie and the book in this, you're not going to have your kind of image ruined by watching the portrayal of the characters on film versus reading the book and what you may envision in your mind. So with all that out of the way, let's get into the book here. So the book was written by Thomas Harris in 1998, which was a sequel to his 1981 novel, Red Dragon, which was the first introduction of Dr. Lecter. He claims that in the 25th anniversary edition of the book, he has like a little blurb before the book where he claims that the character of Lecter was inspired by a doctor he met in a Mexican prison. Harris was down there doing some research, and he was interviewing an inmate who was like, I should be dead, but I was saved because of the skills of this doctor. So he goes and he interviews the doctor about it, and the doctor was very calm, and he seemed like such a well put together guy, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary to Harris, as it were, until later he was told he was also a prisoner, the doctor. Not Harris. The doctor was a prisoner, and he was a convicted murderer in this Mexican prison. He gives a false name, and, because he's like, afterwards he went back to America to live out his life, or something along those lines. I've read some analysis and some people that say that this story is a fabrication, to just kind of entice readers and be like, ooh, it's more spooky than it already is. But there's no definitive yes or no. It's just kind of what he is saying at this point. But the book is the basic story where it's Clarice Starling. She goes at Crawford's behest to go interview Dr. Lecter eventually to find out information which can help them capture Buffalo Bill, which I'll get a little more into that when I talk about the movie. The main huge differences, of course, is in the book. The Chilton-Lecter relationship is far more developed, and because in the movie there's just a few lines or some scenes, but in the book they really show more and talk more about some of the things that Lecter does to kind of jab at Chilton, and Chilton kind of getting back at him in the legal ways he can, kind of a thing, because he's more depicted as a glorified schoolmaster, kind of almost. He's not a doctor. So that really kind of sticks at him and what have you. Of course, the book has more characters, like I was saying, just because they have pages and so they can do anything they want. There's more victims, and then there's more just people that are encountered that are unfortunately not in the book. Even the main kind of kickoff to the investigation, when she finds the head in the garage, it's a different character than is in the movie. But that's okay. It's all fine. They got to do that kind of thing. We get a lot more from Buffalo Bill's POV and just kind of his methodology and what he's doing. More, of course, with when Lecter escapes from the Tennessee kind of temporary prison that they have set up, we again get some more scenes in the book where it follows him and just kind of what is his next step? What is his next step? What is his plan? Kind of thing. Whereas in the movie, it's all left ambiguous until you just kind of see him. And that totally works for the movie. One of the main differences, of course, Silence of the Lambs is the main trauma that Clarice deals with, is that she sometimes has nightmares about when she was a child, waking up with the lambs screaming because they were slaughtering. But they weren't just slaughtering lambs. They were actually she lived on a horse and lamb ranch, and so the horses were also being killed. So she runs away with a horse, not a lamb. And it's in the book, it's revealed that she didn't get very far, but then the horse was rescued and got to go with her to the school, the boarding school she eventually went to. And so it's a different twist there, but in the movie it all kind of seems to make, because it's just about the lambs, and that makes it makes sense both ways kind of thing. And I think just because the movie has to pare down stuff, it kind of keeps it more simplified, that it's like it was about the lambs. So at the end of the movie, of course, as well, she receives a phone call from Dr. Lecter. Whereas in the book, he writes her a letter, and similar to how it's in Hannibal, he gets it like remailed around the world in a couple times, so then, they can't track down exactly where he is instead of a phone call. And he writes like a poem and some other stuff. But one thing I really did like was that he writes in his letter how saving Catherine Martin will only temporarily silence the lambs, and like her main motivation for becoming a cop / an FBI agent, is to always seek solace from the nightmare. And then he's basically saying how it's like she's gonna have to consistently work at silencing the lambs. Anything she does will only bring a temporary reprieve, and it'll always return like the nightmares. So I thought that was kind of a cool look into her psyche and Lecter's take on it, kind of thing. I thought that was really neat, and it just kind of elevates the whole material, that it's not just the simple back and forth conversation they have, which again works really well in the movie. So the book won the 1988 Bram Stoker's Award for Best Novel. It also won the 1989 Anthony Award for Best Novel, and it was nominated in 1989 for a World Fantasy Award, but I guess it didn't win that one, unfortunately. Like I said, the book is really great. I've read both Red Dragon, Silence of the Lambs, and the follow-up Hannibal. All three of the books are great reads. This one is definitely the more kind of almost dialed-in story. The Red Dragon one is really good. It was previously done. It was actually also made into a movie before Silence of the Lambs called Manhunter. It didn't do so well, so there was a lot of speculation about Silence of the Lambs and whether it could do well financially as a movie and what have you, which obviously they did. So I would totally recommend reading all three of the books. They're not a lot of fun, but they're great reads, and it really kind of keeps you glued to the page, and you want to, see what happens next. You want to find out what's happening with this character. And I was really shocked to learn that the book came out in 1988 and then was made into a movie in 91. I was like, holy, that was a really quick turnaround time. And I was watching some interviews with Ted Talley, who wrote the screenplay, and it was basically, he was like, yeah, as soon as I read the book, I thought this would make a really good movie. And he wasn't the only one. A few people went out and immediately tried to obtain the rights. Notably, Jodie Foster tried to buy the rights to the movie. She found out Gene Hackman actually already owned them. Him and Orion Pictures created a deal where he would put up half the money and Orion would put up half the money for the rights of the movie. And yeah, like I said, Gene Hackman wanted to direct the movie and potentially be in it as either Crawford or Lecter himself. He backed out of the project. I've heard a couple different stories why. One, he felt he wasn't maybe like, he didn't want to be in a scary movie, or it was like, there was a couple different reasons as to why he backed out, but eventually he backed out of the project. This was about halfway through. Ted Talley, I think he had done one draft of the script, and then they were like, oh, we don't have the money to make the movie. But an executive at Orion Pictures encouraged him to just continue. He's like, we'll find the money, we'll make this movie, which eventually, like I said, they did. So in preparation for this kind of breakdown, I did read the screenplay as well as watch the movie and read the book. So I read the screenplay. I read a draft of the script, which was from June 1990. So I'm not sure if it was the total final one. I think it was, because there were some signatures on it and some crossed out sections. But what was interesting was that there were a lot of scenes in the screenplay that were eventually either that were cut or in another version of the draft maybe that were more ripped from the book, like some dialogue especially, and a couple of scenes where there was one scene in particular, which I guess I'll get to here. So let's just go through this real quick here. So 1991, the director, Jonathan Demme, the writer, Ted Talley, like I said. So you got their cast. Jodie Foster as Clarice Starling, the young FBI agent trainee. You got Scott Glenn, who's Jack Crawford, who's the head of the Behavioral Sciences Division. And he's the one who brings Clarice on to go interview Hannibal Lecter, who's played by Anthony Hopkins, of course. You got Ted Levine, who was James Gunn / Buffalo Bill, who was the serial killer they're trying to track down. Anthony Heald, he's Frederick Chilton, the head of the asylum that Lecter is being held at. And you have some other cast there, of course. The budget was $19 to $20 million, and it grossed worldwide $272.7, so almost $273 million on its budget. So they made bank. But what's crazy is that Orion Pictures itself was already in financial kind of troubles around this time, so they eventually folded. And it's crazy that they were making all these super popular movies and well-received critically movies. Like they funded Dances with Wolves and stuff like that. So it's kind of a too bad story, because they were allowing these directors to come in and they were making all sorts of varied movies and pictures and stuff like that. So like I said, Jodie Foster, she was championing hard for the role of Clarice. She really wanted the role, but the director initially wanted Michelle Pfeiffer. He had just recently finished doing a project with her. And I've also heard, again, mixed stories about why they didn't get Michelle Pfeiffer. One of the reasons I've heard is that the financiers didn't want to pay the fee that she wanted. She wanted more money than they were willing to put up. I've also heard that she didn't want to be in a scary type movie, like a slasher horror-ish movie. So again, some conflicting stories in Hollywood about what exactly happened there. But she didn't end up getting the role. So Jonathan Demme was like, okay, I'll meet with Jodie Foster about it. And there was one meeting, but he basically gave her the role before they had actually spoke. Basically, he said he saw her walking down the hallway with like a determined, like, I'm gonna make this happen kind of look. And he was like, yeah, that's clearly Starling the whole movie, because she's a woman in a man's world, especially around that time, going into the FBI, into like serial killing, a division and stuff like that. And that's a huge motif in the entire movie. I mean, it's everywhere, where even in the book, of course, as well, like, you get a little more perspective from Clarice's side, where it's like, she's in a room full of cops and they're all tall men and blah blah blah, and then she's got to tell them all, like, hey, get out of here, we got work to do, kind of thing. So yeah, so Foster got the role, of course. Anthony Hopkins, it was like, when he got sent the script, his agent was like, oh, I'm sending you this movie, and he thought it was going to be like a children's movie. And it was actually his first kind of like big Hollywood movie. He was mostly doing British stage stuff, and then he was kind of like, if it doesn't work out, maybe I'll just continue doing stage stuff. And it worked out, of course. He won an Oscar for it. The movie follows the same structure, of course, of the book, where it's there's conversations between Clarice and Hannibal Lecter, and then he gives her some clues or some information about the killer, and she goes to track it down and etc. And one of the main scenes in the book, and it was in the screenplay as well, that really kind of solidifies, because basically what happens is after they make the bluff deal with Lecter, and Chilton gets involved, and the senator finds out, and they get kicked off the case. Clarice goes to Crawford and is like, look, send me back out there, even though, because they have a back and forth dialogue about it, about how it's gonna basically keep her out of graduating from the FBI Academy. And he's like, look, might be he's like, I can guarantee maybe they won't get kicked out, but it's going to be like another 6 months before you can even get back in, and blah, blah, blah. And she's like, I don't care. Like, she's determined to save Catherine Martin. And it's a really cool back and forth scene, and it's a really, again, showing her determination to like finish the job, instead of like, just being career minded and being like, oh, well, I tried my best, it's over. And she's like, no, she's going to get in there and not give up. It was in the screenplay, it's in the book, but I don't know if it was shot and just cut or what, but it's too bad, because like I said, it's another good scene as to showing why because the movie, I've seen it a couple times, of course, before this, but I'm trying to recall exactly, it almost kind of like skips that, where it's like, why is she suddenly out there, because she goes from Tennessee back to DC, and then back out to like Ohio or whatever, right? So there's a little chink missing kind of thing, but other than that, the movie is like so good. So I really like that scene. And what I really like about the movie, when you kind of start looking at it a little more, is that it's a story really about like two influences on Clarice. or mentors, you could almost look at it, because you got Crawford, who's influencing kind of like her external view, her future, challenging her skills as an investigator and as an FBI agent. And then you have Lecter, of course, who's challenging her internal view and how she sees herself and others and her past, and making her face like either her trauma or her motivations as to why, what is she doing with her life and why is she doing it. And so I just love that whole look at it throughout the entire movie, because you always get scenes with her with Crawford and they're investigating something, and then you get her with scenes with Lecter and it's discussing something, personal and what's going on, and like how is she gonna evolve over the course of the story. Like I said, it's super great. And this, I think, again, in the book it plays entirely different, but in my opinion, it has two of the most well executed twists in movies that, like, even if you saw it coming, or even if you know they're still so well executed. Like, even like I said, I've seen this movie a ton of times. You still know it, but of course the first twist is the Lecter face swap when he's escaping from the Tennessee prison, and you see some what looks like Lecter, of course, on the elevator shaft, or on the elevator box, and it's through the elevator shaft, and he's got the white uniform on, he's all messed up. And they've already carted out, like, one of the injured cops that Lecter messed up. And then it turns out it's not. That Lecter's in the ambulance. And there's a cool little dialogue line there as well when the EMT is talking to the hospital. And he's like, oh, yeah, his pulse is, like, really good, blah, blah, blah. And that's, like, a quick nod to earlier when Chilton's like, oh, when he attacked that nurse, his pulse never got above, like, 85, right? So he's still calm under this scenario. And then, it's so good and so well executed. And just the first time you're just like, oh my gosh, like, how is that even happening? And you got to think about it as well, that he creates that crazy scene that's, inspired by paintings and stuff like that, of just horror to, like, upset all the cops, and he gets himself out of there. In the book, actually, they mention how he must have called the ambulance because it was there so quickly. It's not just that the SWAT guys were like, oh, officers down, we need cops, or need an ambulance. It's like he's already done that part of the plan. And the second great twist that I love is when the HRT, the Hostage Rescue Team, they're in, like, somewhere near Chicago with Jack Crawford, and then they break into a house and everything, like, everybody get down, FBI, and the house is just empty. And they cut interchange between, like, the guy ringing the doorbell and James Gumb in his basement, and like a ringer going on. And then, of course, the door opens and he's standing face to face with Clarice. So good, because as an audience, you just know, you're like, oh my god, like, what is gonna happen? Because the movie's coming to a pretty intense crescendo at that point. They go down, he chases her into the basement and stuff like that, and it's not too bad, but it would have been interesting, because again, in the book, we get more descriptions of the basement and how it's just kind of like how larger it is and how there's more rooms, and he was bringing some people down there to, like, hunt them in the dark because he's got the night vision and stuff like that, just to toy with them. You get a little glimpse of that in the film, but not as much. But again, it's budget and time and etc. What are they going to do? So yeah, that's just like, again, your mind is just blown and you're like, oh no, Clarice, what have you done? Like, what is going to happen here? Another thing I wanted to bring up was the poster for Silence of the Lambs. The movie has a blending, of course, of Anthony Hopkins' face with Jodie Foster's face and a death head moth in the middle. And I think that's kind of a nod to a couple different things, because in the book, there's a scene where Jack Crawford, after he speaks with Clarice and she goes away, he holds up two pictures of each of them, and he kind of melds them together, and he has, like, some dialogue and some thoughts about it. He's like, oh, I wonder how this is going to play out and what's going to be created from this. And so I think it was kind of a nod to that. And as well as in the movie, because they changed Lecter's cell to be like a plexiglass wall instead of, like, bars with a net, which is described in the book, there's always a reflection of either Anthony Hopkins' face when he's talking with Jodie Foster, or vice versa. So you always get that duality, and you always get that kind of intensity between the two of them, as well as the movie has so many close-ups of the actors when they're talking to each other. they're really dissecting and delving into the audience a lot. And Anthony Hopkins' performance, of course, is just amazing. He did so many subtle things about, his posture and his blinking patterns even, and, so many great things to love. The movie, of course, won Oscars. A lot of them. It won Best Picture, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay. It was nominated for a couple other ones. I think it actually also did win for the score. It was done by Howard Shore, who then later on went to do the Lord of the Rings score, which the Lord of the Rings score I actually really do enjoy. I've always wanted to check out when they have kind of like the Lord of the Rings symphony. I don't know if it's come through BC, but I've always enjoyed the score of the Lord of the Rings. So it's interesting because his score is very melodic, a lot of violin and all that kind of stuff like that. And so it's not like just a straight horror score, like Psycho, same kind of a thing where there is that one iconic thing, but this is just a very like melodic, movie score. There's not like something weird, like a guitar going off or something like that kind of thing. There's not much else. I mean, I could just keep praising the movie, but again, the set design is all really great, and there's so many subtle things that they did to draw you into this world of this FBI agent. All of the actors, well, not all the actors, sorry, but many of them got to go to Quantico, whereas the FBI's trainee center. Jodie Foster went in some of the classes, and Scott Glenn met the head of the behavioral sciences division there and kind of shadowed him, and they kind of recreated their whole office space, which is just an underground, for those opening FBI scenes and stuff like that. So yeah, a lot of attention to detail, really good, really great stuff. The movie still holds up exceedingly well, and like I said, even when you know the story and the twists, it's still such a good watch, because it's just this crazy good story. And like I said, can't recommend it enough. If you haven't seen it, check it out, even though I've just spoiled everything. Read the book. And like I said, do it that method. Watch the movie, read the book afterwards, and you won't be disappointed. I think that's all I'm going to say about Silence of the Lambs. Again, the book written by Thomas Harris, movie from 1991. If you've liked this content and want to get more, you can check us out at tomeofuselessness.com. We have an Instagram. We have some YouTube videos up. We got links to all that stuff off our website. And you can check out some episodes where Devin and I also discuss movies and other topics. Thanks for listening, and have a great day.